The officer's face went pale as he read the name on the driver's license. His hands, which had been steady just moments ago as he gripped his ticket book, began to tremble. His throat tightened, and a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. The name staring back at him was one he had seen before, on the news, in the papers, and most importantly inside the police station he worked at every day, Marcus Taylor, Jr. His mind raced, his pulse pounded in his ears. This wasn't just any black driver he had pulled over for no reason. This was Chief Marcus Taylor's son. The same Chief Taylor who had spent decades cleaning up the police department, fighting corruption, and, worst of all, had no tolerance for racist cops. The officer had just accused his son of a crime he didn't commit. And now there was no way out of it. Marcus Jr. stared at the officer, his eyes locked onto the man's face with quiet fury. The silence between them stretched, thick with tension. "License and registration," the officer repeated, trying to sound firm, but his voice cracked. Marcus Jr. leaned back in his seat, folding his arms. "You sure you want to go down this road, officer?" he asked calmly, his tone almost amused. "Because I don't think you realize who I am." The officer swallowed hard, but before he could speak, the sound of another car approaching made his stomach drop. A sleek black SUV rolled up behind his patrol car, and the moment the doors opened, the officer knew his career might be over. It had all started just 30 minutes earlier. Marcus Jr. was on his way home from a late basketball practice. The sun had already set, and the streets were quiet. He wasn't speeding, wasn't swerving, wasn't doing anything wrong. Yet the flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror told him otherwise. He sighed, pulling over to the side of the road. He had been through this before. 9 times. The officer stepped out of his car, his boots crunching against the gravel as he approached. Marcus Jr. could see the smirk on the man's face through the side mirror. "Driver, roll down your window," the officer barked. Marcus Jr. took his time, pressing the button slowly, the window gliding down. "Evening, officer. Everything okay?" The cop tilted his head, squinting. "License and registration now." Marcus Jr. didn't move. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" The officer scoffed. "Your taillight's out." Marcus Jr. glanced in the mirror. He had just checked his taillights this morning. He knew they were working perfectly fine. He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, yeah? Which one?" The cop's smirk faltered for a second, but he recovered quickly. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus Jr. chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't think so. Not until you tell me why." The officer's expression darkened. "You want to play games with me, boy? Step out now." Marcus Jr. exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel. His father had warned him about situations like this. Stay calm. Don't escalate. Don't give them a reason. But this cop was looking for one. "All right," Marcus Jr. said, finally moving. "I'll step out. But just so you know, this whole interaction is being recorded. My dash cam's on." The officer froze for a moment. He clenched his jaw. "You think I care about some camera? Get out of the damn car." Marcus Jr. pushed open the door, stepping out slowly, keeping his hands where they could be seen. He was tall, athletic, and carried himself with confidence. But he could see it in the officer's eyes. The man wanted him to be afraid. "Turn around," the cop ordered. "Hands on the car." Marcus Jr. hesitated. "For what?" "Turn. Around. Now." He had a choice. Comply or resist. Neither felt like a win. Before he could decide, the officer grabbed his arm, yanking it behind his back. Pain shot through his shoulder as he was shoved against the car. "Hey! What the hell?" he shouted. The officer leaned in close. "You're resisting! Bad move, boy!" Marcus Jr. clenched his jaw. He wanted to fight back, but he knew that's exactly what the cop wanted. He had seen it happen before, to friends, to family, to strangers on the news. A black man fights back, and suddenly he's the criminal. "This is harassment," Marcus Jr. muttered. "Shut up!" The cop snapped, reaching for his radio. "I got a suspect resisting arrest. I need backup." Marcus Jr. closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He took a deep breath and then did the one thing the officer wasn't expecting. He laughed. The cop paused, his grip tightening. "Something funny?" Marcus Jr. grinned. "Oh, you have no idea what you've just done." The officer scoffed. "Yeah? And why's that?" Marcus Jr. turned his head slightly, meeting the officer's eyes. "Because my father is Chief Marcus Taylor, and you just put your hands on his son." Silence. The officer blinked, his mouth slightly open. He looked at Marcus Jr. closely, as if just now realizing the resemblance. His lips parted as if to say something, but nothing came out. Then the radio on his shoulder crackled. "Dispatch to Officer Reynolds. Chief Taylor is en route to your location. Stand by." The officer's face turned white, and then, from behind them, a black SUV pulled up. The doors swung open, and out stepped Chief Marcus Taylor himself. Officer Reynolds's throat went dry as he watched Chief Marcus Taylor step out of the black SUV. His movements were slow, deliberate, and filled with authority. He wasn't just a police chief. He was the police chief. The man who had built a reputation for rooting out corruption, exposing bad cops, and demanding justice. And now he was here, staring down at the officer who had just manhandled his son. Marcus Jr. turned his head slightly, his lips curving into a small smirk. "Told you." The chief's eyes landed on his son first, scanning him from head to toe. "Are you okay?" His voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge beneath it. Marcus Jr. nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just another routine traffic stop, right, officer?" He turned his head slightly, daring Reynolds to speak. Reynolds felt his palms get clammy. He could feel the weight of Chief Taylor's gaze pressing down on him like a boulder. "What's going on here?" the chief asked, his voice controlled but firm. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Sir, I pulled the vehicle over for a broken taillight." Chief Taylor's expression didn't change. "And that required you to put my son in handcuffs?" Reynolds hesitated. "He was resisting—" "Resisting what?" the chief interrupted. His tone was sharper now. "Answer carefully, officer, because whatever you say next better be the truth." Reynolds' heart pounded. He had made a huge mistake, and now there was no way out of it. Silence stretched between them, thick as fog. The night air felt colder now, the tension crackling like static electricity. Chief Taylor took a slow step forward. Officer Reynolds instinctively stepped back. "What exactly happened here?" the chief repeated, his voice dangerously low. Reynolds's mind scrambled for an answer. "Sir, I thought he was acting suspiciously—" "Suspicious?" Marcus Jr. scoffed, shaking his head. "I was driving home from practice. You profiled me. That's all this was." Taylor's eyes never left Reynolds. "Do you have body cam footage?" Reynolds hesitated. His body cam was on, but he knew the footage wouldn't help his case. "Yes, sir. But play it," the chief ordered. Reynolds hesitated. "I don't think—" "I wasn't asking." Taylor's voice was now razor-sharp. With shaky hands, Reynolds reached for his radio. He knew he had no choice. He activated the playback, and as the distorted voices crackled through the night air, the reality of the situation became painfully clear. The footage showed everything. Marcus Jr. asking why he was pulled over, Reynolds giving a weak excuse about a broken taillight, Marcus Jr. calmly questioning him, Reynolds' rising aggression, the forceful arrest. Chief Taylor's jaw tightened as the scene unfolded. When the video ended, he took a deep breath. "Take off those handcuffs," he said, his tone brooking no argument. Reynolds hesitated for only a second before fumbling with the cuffs, releasing Marcus Jr. Marcus Jr. rolled his wrists, shaking his head. "This happens every day to people who don't have a father like mine." Taylor turned to his son. "Go wait in the car." Marcus Jr. hesitated. "Dad!" "Now." Marcus Jr. exhaled sharply but obeyed, walking to the SUV. The chief then turned back to Reynolds. "Badge and gun, now!" Reynolds's eyes widened. "Sir, please, You have 10 seconds to hand them over, or I'll make sure Internal Affairs sees this before sunrise." Defeated, Reynolds unholstered his gun and unclipped his badge, placing them in the chief's outstretched hand. Taylor studied him for a long moment. "Get in your patrol car and go back to the station. You'll be hearing from IA." Reynolds swallowed hard, nodding stiffly before turning and walking back to his cruiser. As he drove away, he knew one thing for sure. His career was over. And maybe, just maybe, justice had been served. The moment Reynolds walked into the station, he knew the whispers had already started. Officers turned their heads, some exchanging looks, others shaking their heads. His stomach twisted into knots. He hadn't even clocked out yet, and somehow, everyone seemed to know he had messed up. Captain Holloway stood at the front desk, arms crossed. "Reynolds, in my office, now." Reynolds swallowed hard and followed him down the hallway. The door slammed shut behind him. "What the hell were you thinking?" Holloway's voice was sharp. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Reynolds opened his mouth, but Holloway held up a hand. "Save it. We have a problem. The chief is furying. Us. IA is breathing down our necks, and you—" He pointed at Reynolds. "You just put this entire department under a microscope." Reynolds clenched his fists. "It was just a traffic stop." "No, it wasn't," Holloway snapped. "You pulled over the chief's son for nothing. You put him in cuffs, and now the media is already sniffing around. We're about to be the face of another police scandal." A sinking feeling hit Reynolds like a brick. He had no idea things had escalated this fast. Before he could respond, the phone on Holloway's desk rang. Holloway picked it up, listened for a few seconds, and his face paled. He set the phone down slowly, eyes locked onto Reynolds. "That was the mayor. He wants you gone. Effective immediately." Reynolds's world tilted. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. This was the end. The tension in the air didn't fade even after Reynolds's taillights disappeared into the night. Chief Taylor exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. He turned to look at his son, who was still standing near the SUV, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Let's go home," the chief said, his voice quieter now. Marcus Jr. hesitated. "Dad, what's going to happen to him?" Taylor's jaw tightened. "Internal Affairs will handle it. He won't be a cop much longer." Marcus Jr. shook his head. "That's not enough. He'll just move to another department, do the same thing to someone else." Taylor sighed. "We'll make sure that doesn't happen. But tonight, let's just get you home." Marcus Jr. stared at his father for a long moment before nodding. They got into the SUV, the weight of the night settling over them as they drove off into the dark. But deep down, both of them knew this wasn't over yet. Days later, the body cam footage went viral. News outlets picked up the story, and protests erupted across the city. People demanded deeper investigations into the department's policies, exposing a troubling pattern of racial profiling. Officer Reynolds was officially fired and blacklisted from law enforcement. Chief Taylor made it clear his department would no longer protect racist officers. Marcus Jr. found himself at the center of a movement. He spoke at rallies, used social media to spread awareness, and worked alongside his father to push for stronger reforms. One night, as Marcus Jr. sat across from his father at the dinner table, he asked, "Do you think anything will really change?" Taylor met his son's gaze. "It already has, because you didn't let them silence you." Marcus Jr. nodded, determination settling in his chest. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about all the voices that had gone unheard for too long. And he was just getting started.